I crave a hero.
Thinking about your next meal, aren't you? Good news, Mr. Hero has you covered. Order in-store, online, or through the Mr. Hero mobile app. Or stay cozy and order DoorDash delivery. Get all your Mr. Hero favorites, including our new chicken tenders and chicken tender wraps. Choose from 6 bold sauces, including hot honey, garlic parmesan, buffalo teriyaki, and more. We'll see you soon at Mr. Hero.
I crave a hero.
LifeAudio.
Well, good morning, friends and faithful listeners. Hi, my name is Jen. I am the host of the Bible Explained podcast. We're going to be finishing up another chapter of the Bible today, 2 Chronicles 18, and talking about the death of King Ahab and also why King Jehoshaphat decided it was a good idea to go into battle with King Ahab, even though there was a prophecy telling Ahab not to go into battle. We'll get into this episode in just 1 second. So I have an interesting new development that happened with me and my husband just recently. My husband is now the interim worship leader at my church, and I am the vocal worship leader at my church now. So I'm still doing youth group. I'm still doing worship with the youth. But last month, the worship leader put in her resignation at our church, and the pastor called my husband and was like, hey, can you do this until we find a worship leader to take over full time? And so my husband agreed. We just on Sunday had our first worship together, my husband and I, up on the stage. And I think it went really well. So I've been enjoying the process of doing worship up at the front of the stage once again. So that's been something really, really exciting going on in my life recently. But faithful listeners, if you ever have a prayer request or something that you'd like to share with me, please feel free to contact me via my email address, which is listed in the description of every single episode. But let's go ahead and jump into this episode for today, right after a quick word from a sponsor.
Need a daily spark of hope and direction? Let the Daily Bible app from Salem Media be that spark. This free Android app delivers an uplifting verse each morning, plus reading plans, devotions, and trusted podcasts from leaders like Joyce Meyer and Rick Warren. Prefer to listen instead? The Daily Bible app reads verses, reading plans, and chapters aloud, handy for the headphones moment of your day. Choose from versions like ESV, NIV, KJV, and more, and bookmark favorites to revisit later. Share inspiring messages with loved ones right from the app. Feel God's presence in every notification. Search for Daily Bible app on Google Play and begin your day with hope, purpose, and peace.
Fall is here, which means it's time to plan ahead and make sure your brand is showing up in ways that have an impact. That's where 4imprint comes in. 4imprint have promotional products that work as hard as you do. Durable, useful, and designed to make a lasting impression. Think quality apparel your team will wear again and again, including popular and exclusive brands. Drinkware that's enjoyed again and again. Bags, notebooks, tools, and tech items that don't just look good, but actually get used. With thousands of customizable options, 4imprint makes it easy to find what fits your brand and your budget. You'll get expert help, free samples, and their 360-degree guarantee means you can be 4imprint certain your order shows up just right on time. Whether you're gearing up for fall events or simply planning ahead for the season, 4imprint helps your brand show up, stay useful, and make connections that last. Explore the possibilities at 4imprint.com.
4imprint for certain.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and finish up 2 Chronicles 18, verses 18 through 34. I'll be reading as I always do from the WEB, but make sure to read out of the version that you prefer this morning, and also grab your cup of coffee or your cup of tea this morning to enjoy with me as we read 2 Chronicles 18 through 34 together. Micaiah said, "Therefore hear Yahweh's word. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the army of heaven standing on his right hand and on his left. Yahweh said, Who will entice Ahab, king of Israel, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth-Gilead? One spoke saying in this way, and another saying in that way. A spirit came out, stood before Yahweh, and said, I will entice him. Yahweh said to him, How? He said, I will go, and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. He said, You will entice him, and you will prevail also. Go and do so. Now therefore, behold, Yahweh has put a lying spirit in the mouth of these your prophets, and Yahweh has spoken evil concerning you. Then Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah came near, and struck Micaiah on the cheek, and said, Which way did Yahweh's spirit go from me to speak to you? Micaiah said, Behold, you shall see on that day, when you go into the inner room to hide yourself. The king of Israel said, Take Micaiah and carry him back to Ammon the governor of the city, and to Joash the king's son, and say, The king says, Put this fellow in prison and feed him with the bread of affliction and the water of affliction until I return in peace. Micaiah said, If you return at all in peace, Yahweh has not spoken by me. He said, Listen, all you people, all of you. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat the king of Judah went up to Ramoth-Gilead. The king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and go into battle, but you put on your robes. So the king of Israel disguised himself, and they went into the battle. Now the king of Syria had commanded the captains of his chariots, saying, Don't fight with small nor great, except only with the king of Israel. When the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat, they said, It's the king of Israel. Therefore they turned around to fight against him. But Jehoshaphat cried out, and Yahweh helped him, and God moved them to depart from him. When the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. A certain man drew his bow at random, and struck the king of Israel between the joints of the armor. Therefore he said to the driver of the chariot, Turn around and carry me out of battle, for I am severely wounded. The battle increased that day. However, the king of Israel propped himself up in his chariot against the Syrians until the evening, and at about sunset he died. So on Monday, we talked about the first half of this chapter. And to do a quick recap, Ahab and Jehoshaphat became allies with each other. Jehoshaphat being the good king of Judah, Ahab being the bad king of Israel. So he goes and visits King Ahab, and Ahab's like, hey, I'm really sick of these Syrians. Can we go to war with each other? I'll help you, you help me. We'll just get rid of these Syrians across the board. And Jehoshaphat is like, yeah, this is a great idea. But first, let's ask Yahweh what he thinks. So King Ahab, who was a worshiper of pretty much everything, except Yahweh, really, he brings together all of the prophets that he had, which was about 400 men. And all of these men are prophesying. They're like, yes, this is a great idea. You should go and defeat these Syrians. God is with you. He is going to protect you. And we don't know what these prophets were. We know at least some of them claim to be prophets of Yahweh, but it very well could be that many of these other prophets were prophets of Baal, prophets of Asherah, Moloch, Chemosh, whoever else Ahab worshipped. So they were all illegitimate prophets. And Jehoshaphat can kind of smell the crap that's going on with these prophets. And he turns to Ahab and he's like, hey, do you have like a real prophet of Yahweh? Like somebody that, actually is a prophet? And so Ahab is like, well, there's this one guy, but I hate him. And that's verbatim. I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me. And Jehoshaphat's like, well, you shouldn't hate one of God's prophets. Can we hear what this guy has to say? So Ahab goes and gets him. And this guy's name was Micaiah, the son of Imlah. And this is really the only time we see Micaiah mentioned in scripture by name. There is a possibility that he shows up in 1 Kings 20 as a nameless prophet, but there's really no way to tell if that nameless prophet was Micaiah or not. But some people guess that it was. And if that is the case, if the nameless prophet in 1 Kings 20 is Micaiah, then the two times that we see Micaiah, he gets punched in the face. So poor Micaiah. He's always getting punched in the face every single time we see him, if in fact he was the nameless prophet in 1 Kings 20. But anyway, Micaiah comes to the courtyard and he starts out by being really snarky to the king of Israel. He's like, oh yes, king, you're definitely going to prosper in this battle. That's what you want to hear, isn't it? And the king gets really angry. He's like, Micaiah, how many times have I told you to speak nothing but the truth in Yahweh's name? So the king knew he was being snarky. There was clearly something going on with Micaiah's tone. And so Micaiah says in verse 16, I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains as sheep that have no shepherd. Yahweh said, these have no master. Let them return to his house in peace. So that's a really heavy prophecy. That's a prophecy that Israel is going to go out to battle, and all of the people are going to be scattered because they have no shepherd. In other words, their king is gone. So this was a prophecy of Ahab's death. And Ahab turns to Jehoshaphat and he's like, see, this is why I hate this guy. Didn't I tell you he would not prophesy anything good concerning me, but evil? So then Micaiah continues, and that's where we left off today. Verse 18. Micaiah said, therefore hear Yahweh's word. I saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the army of heaven standing on his right hand and on his left. So Micaiah was one of the lucky few prophets that got to see a vision of heaven. He said he saw Yahweh sitting on his throne, and all the army of heaven standing on the right hand and on the left. And Yahweh says to all of these angels, and very likely demons, who will entice Ahab, king of Israel, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And it says one spoke in this way and another spoke in that way. So a bunch of the angels were talking all at the same time, but nobody really wanted to take the job. Until a spirit came out, stood before Yahweh and said, I will entice him. So very likely this was an evil spirit that came up and volunteered for the job. He's like, yeah, I'll do it. That sounds great. And Yahweh says to him, how are you going to do it? And he says, I will go and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. Now you might be wondering at this point, how can God have evil spirits in his presence? Well, God can have anybody in his presence because he's God. You know, there's nobody greater than him, so he can have anybody in his presence. The problem is that we can't handle God's presence. Now, obviously, angels and fallen angels are on a different level than we are. It kind of seems like they're able to tolerate God's glory a little bit differently than we are. You know, we just read yesterday in 1 Timothy that no one has seen God. We cannot handle his presence. So we can't handle being in the presence of God. But angels and fallen angels, it kind of sounds like, can handle being in his presence a little bit better than us. Even though there's some verses that actually say that the angels have to cover their eyes when they're in God's presence, because even though they can handle it better than us, they still can't bear to look at God because of how pure and holy God actually is. So yes, angels and fallen angels together can be in God's presence. Now, that being said, I don't know if fallen angels are still allowed in the presence of God. It very well could be that they're not allowed. We're not really sure. But there are verses that do say that fallen angels were allowed to be in God's presence, even though they were fallen. The most famous example is in the book of Job, where God is holding an audience with all of his angels, and Satan actually shows up and is talking to God and tells God, hey, you favor Job. So maybe I should go and, tempt Job to do all these things. And eventually, if I tempt Job enough, he's going to curse you. And God said, all right, go try and tempt Job. See what happens. And then we find out that Job did not end up cursing God when you read through the book of Job. But my point is that yes, angels and fallen angels together biblically have been in God's presence. So God says to all of these angels, in verse 19, who's going to entice Ahab, the king of Israel, that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And this fallen angel says, I will go and I will be a lying spirit in the mouth of all of his prophets. God said, you will entice him and you will prevail also. Go and do so. And you might be like, why is God being so mean to King Ahab? Well, you have to read 1 Kings in order to really get the full understanding of what is going on here. Ahab was a terrible, terrible king. He just had no mercy. He would kill prophets. He would kill people for pieces of land. He was an awful king. And finally, God had enough. He was like, Ahab, as you murdered a man for a piece of land, I'm going to do the same thing to you someday. And so God now allows this spirit, this lying spirit, to go entice Ahab's prophets. And you might be like, well, Jen, isn't that God causing somebody to sin? Well, no, of course not. God doesn't cause people to sin. In fact, he was telling Ahab through Micaiah exactly what he was doing. There was no secret here. Ahab had a choice. Did he want to listen to these liars? Or was he going to listen to the truth that Micaiah was bringing? It's funny. God was telling Ahab exactly what he was doing. He's like, Ahab, this is what I'm doing. So you can choose to believe the liars, or you can choose to believe me. God literally told Ahab the entire plan through Micaiah. So no, God was not being mean, and he was not causing Ahab to sin. He was telling Ahab, this is what I did. This is the plan. This is what's going to happen if you listen to all of those lying prophets. So listen to Micaiah. So verse 23 says, Zedekiah the son of Chenaanah came over and struck Micaiah on the cheek and said, which way did Yahweh's spirit go from me to speak to you? So Zedekiah, he was one of the false prophets that we talked about on Monday. He was the guy that made horns of iron and was pretending that those horns of iron were something special and being with these, you're going to push back the Syrians until they are consumed. And so he was making a big show out of all of this stuff. But of course, he was just a false prophet. So he goes up to Micaiah, smacks him on the face, and says, Micaiah, since when did God's spirit leave me to go to you? That's what he says. And Micaiah says, well, you'll find out that God's spirit is not with you when you go into an inner room to hide yourself. And we don't have any story about that in scripture. We don't have a story of Zedekiah hiding himself in an inner room. But of course, this took place because Micaiah was a true prophet. So what Micaiah was saying was going to happen. And very likely, after the fall of Ahab that we see here at the end of the chapter, Zedekiah and the other prophets were fleeing for their lives because a new king was in town. My guess is that this happened during the reign of Jehu, actually. Jehu was a few kings later, and he was a really crazy king. All he wanted was blood. But I'm going to guess maybe that's when Zedekiah was hiding himself, was during the reign of King Jehu. But after Micaiah is done with this prophecy and he gets smacked in the face, the king of Israel said, take Micaiah and carry him back to Ammon, the governor of the city, and to Joash, the king's son, and say, the king says, put this fellow in prison and feed him with the bread of affliction and the water of affliction until I return in peace. So in other words, feed this guy very, very little. Take him back to prison, because it's possible that Micaiah was already in prison at this point. Take him to prison and feed him almost nothing until I get back in peace. And so Micaiah is getting dragged away. And he says, if you return at all in peace, Yahweh has not spoken by me. And he yells, listen, you people, all of you. But of course, the people weren't going to listen. And it's really unfortunate because Jehoshaphat didn't listen either. Even though Jehoshaphat was the one who wanted Micaiah to come out and talk about this in the beginning, Jehoshaphat just kind of ignored it. It says, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead. So obviously Ahab was going to make that decision all along because he was always anti-God. He was always in it for himself. He was a very, very spoiled and selfish king. So of course he was going to just do whatever he wanted to do. But the interesting thing is we don't see Jehoshaphat being that type of king. We see Jehoshaphat up until this point generally choosing what Yahweh wants, generally trying to listen to Yahweh. So I don't really know what happened here with Jehoshaphat. It could be that Jehoshaphat did believe this prophecy, but was like, yeah, I'm probably going to be fine because this is a prophecy against Ahab, not me. Could also be that Jehoshaphat didn't want to go back on his initial word because he did tell Ahab at the beginning, hey, I will go out to battle with you, but let's hear what Yahweh has to say about it. So maybe Jehoshaphat was feeling guilty and was like, yeah, I kind of told him I'd go with him, so I might as well. And, this prophecy wasn't about me, so it should be okay. Or maybe Jehoshaphat was easily manipulated, hearing stories about Micaiah being a bad prophet or something from Ahab or other people. Or maybe Jehoshaphat was a yes man. Maybe he was just the kind of guy that had a hard time saying no to people. I don't know what was going on with Jehoshaphat, but he goes out to Ramoth Gilead with King Ahab. And it says right here, the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself and go into the battle, but you put on your robes. So that right there kind of tells me that Micaiah's prophecy did get to Ahab a little bit, because he doesn't want to make himself look like the king in the battle. He's going to disguise himself as one of the common soldiers and just go among the soldiers. And he thinks, well, if Micaiah's prophecy is true, it's not going to matter because I'm not going to die. Since I'm not going to look like the king, I won't be targeted. So he's like, Jehoshaphat, you put on your kingly robes and go out to battle, and I will dress as a commoner. Nobody's going to attack or target me. And Jehoshaphat does it. He's like, yeah, great idea. I don't know what Jehoshaphat was thinking during all of this. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe all that feast food that Ahab gave him at the beginning messed with his brain. I don't know what was happening here. So Jehoshaphat does it. And it says right here in verse 30, though, that God was protecting Jehoshaphat from the very beginning because the king of Syria had commanded the captains of his chariots, saying, don't fight with small nor great, except only with the king of Israel. So the Syrian king told his men, he's like, don't target anybody, a single person, except the king of Israel. That's the only person I really want dead in this battle. So now the war wages. And it says, the captains of the chariots saw Jehoshaphat. They said, it is the king of Israel. Therefore, they turned around to fight against him. So the men in this battle, they see a guy, probably from a distance, dressed in these nice robes. And they're like, that has to be the king of Israel. That guy is certainly the king of Israel. And so they go to try to kill him. But Jehoshaphat, it said, cried out, and Yahweh helped him. And God moved them to depart from him. So God helped Jehoshaphat at the same time as bringing destruction on King Ahab. This reminds me of a verse. It's either in 1 or 2 Peter that talks about how God can absolutely rescue while at the same time bringing destruction. And I believe the examples that Peter gave was Noah in the ark and also Lot and his daughters fleeing from Sodom and Gomorrah. So God can rescue at the same time as bringing destruction to other people. And that's why we shouldn't fear God's wrath. It's because we're not meant for that wrath. His children are not meant for that wrath. And Jehoshaphat cries out to God. And maybe he cried out in fear. And God listened and moved those men to depart from him. So here's how God did it. When the captains of the chariots saw that it was not the king of Israel, they turned back from pursuing him. Because don't forget, they were given the order not to fight against anybody, whether they were small or great. It didn't matter who they were. The Syrian king only wanted the king of Israel. Not any other king, not any rich person, but the king of Israel. So the men driving these chariots, they're like, oh, that's not the right guy. We've got the wrong guy. And they turn away. And meanwhile, verse 33, a certain man drew his bow at random and struck the king of Israel between the joints of the armor. The king of Israel thought he was going to be protected, disguised, and also heavily armored. And yet, somebody drawing their bow at random, just hoping to hit somebody, it strikes the king of Israel between the joints of the armor. What are the odds of that? What are the odds of that happening? And I'm wondering at that point in time, did Ahab know that this prophecy was coming true against him? He says to his men, turn around and carry me out of the battle, for I am severely wounded. And they tried to, but they couldn't. The battle increased that day. However, the king of Israel propped himself up in his chariot against the Syrians until the evening, and at about sunset, he died. So he was trying to get away, it sounds like, but the battle just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and he was unable to get away. So he props himself up in his chariot the best he can, maybe fighting against the Syrians, I don't know. But he did this until evening. And presumably this was a very, very long time that Ahab was dying, like hours and hours that Ahab was slowly dying because of this arrow wound. He died at sunset, is what it says. So he did not have an easy death. He should have listened to Micaiah. He should have listened to the one prophet that was telling him the truth, exactly what was going on. That's the man he should have listened to, but he chose incorrectly. He chose what he wanted to hear, not the truth. And we discussed that a little bit on Monday. We talked about how, prophecy is not always something we want to hear. In fact, generally, prophecy is something we don't want to hear. because prophecy comes to us in order to warn us about something that's going to happen or get us to change from our wayward ways so that we can get back on the right path. That's not to say all prophecy will be negative, but the majority of prophecy in the Old Testament has a negative connotation to it. That's what Ahab didn't understand or realize because he didn't care. He didn't care about Yahweh. Now, I don't know what Jehoshaphat's problem was. I don't know why he went into this battle, but we're going to find out how God handles Jehoshaphat in the next chapter because God does have some words for Jehoshaphat. Like, why did you do that? So we're going to get into that topic on Monday, and I hope that you tune in then. But faithful listeners, before I end the episode, here is a quick word from one or two of our sponsors.
Want to keep God's word with you wherever you go? The King James Bible Study KJV app by Salem Media makes it easy to read, study, share, and pray daily with the timeless KJV translation. Enjoy features like offline access, audio Bible listening, smart search, and tools to highlight, bookmark, and take notes, all designed to keep your Bible study simple and organized. Best of all, it's free to download in the Google Play Store. Grow in your faith every day. Search for King James Bible Study KJV and download the app today.
In conclusion of this episode, it is good to listen to Yahweh. It is good to hear the truth and to believe the truth. The truth is really what sets us free. And unfortunately, Ahab did not listen to the truth, but listened to the lying spirit of all of these false prophets. Well, faithful listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, share it on your social media platforms and tell people that the Bible Explained podcast exists. Word of mouth is the best way to get this podcast out to more people. Now, don't forget that tomorrow we're going to be in the New Testament because on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do a New Testament episode, and then on Mondays and Wednesdays, I do an Old Testament episode. And of course, Fridays are for the members, and we are going through the book of Psalms right now on the Friday podcast. So faithful listeners, I hope to see all of you guys tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., to talk about a brand new book of the Bible. That's right, we're going to be starting 2 Timothy tomorrow, and I'm very, very excited to get into a brand new book of the New Testament with you. So faithful listeners, have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy listening, and God bless. I just want to take a second to thank the team at LifeAudio for their partnership with me on the Bible Explained podcast. In fact, if you go to lifeaudio.com, you will find dozens of other faith-centered podcasts in their network. They've got shows about prayer, Bible study, parenting, and more.
Hi, I'm Beckett Cook, host of The Beckett Cook Show. I lived as a gay man in Hollywood for many, many years until I had a radical encounter with Jesus 13 years ago. Since then, I've gotten my master's degree in seminary and published a book called A Change of Affection. On my podcast, The Beckett Cook Show, I sit down with fascinating Christian scholars and thinkers to address the lies of the culture and bring the biblical truth to bear on those lies. To start listening now, go to lifeaudio.com or search for The Beckett Cook Show on your favorite podcasting platform.